Hello, everyone. Welcome to I Simplified. I Simplified is a podcast series where we showcase industry leaders to discuss intelligent automation and its impact on SME and mid-market financial services, healthcare, and other related fields. On today's episode, I'm joined by Alexander Hubel from Turbotic, and we're going to be discussing robotic operating model. Alexander is a thought leader. He writes a lot of articles around strategy, around simplification of bots, and I'm very excited to have you here, Alexander. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tolani, for having me here. It's a privilege to be here.
It's pretty privileged. So, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a transformation professional. Professionally, I've been in various industries, various roles for a number of 12, 15 years now. Management consulting, internally at the company, and now at Turbotic. So large-scale change transformation, digital transformation, and since the last 7 years, I think intelligent automation has been my focus, and starting the intelligent automation center of excellence at Ericsson in 2016 and scaling that into something quite big, and then joining Turbotic as the chief strategy officer in last year. So that's my journey so far. Privately, I'm a father of two small kids, so that also takes some time.
You have your hands full, and I like that. I think the structure I have in mind for today is we're going to discuss, the robotic operating model. We'll start from the strategy and the vision, and we move down. I think we cascade down into the six pillars of the operating model. And I think why I want to talk about our six pillars is because you've been writing articles just around, the operating model, and I found yours very fascinating. The way you've, defined your operating model. So just to start off the conversation from here, what is the robotic operating model? What does this mean to you?
No, I've been basing this on my own experience of starting something from scratch and scaling it to something really big, and looking at what works and what didn't work, and also from what I hear when being out at conferences and talking at different webcasts and listening to other leaders in this field, and trying to digest this into something that is tangible, and as an old management consultant, of course, trying to put it into different structure it in a way so that you can make sense out of it, since this is a quite broad and quite complex topic, and this is just my way to structure my thoughts on how you can set up a model or an operating model, or a life cycle, or whatever you want to call it, so that you know who is doing what, who is paying for what, and what kind of competences do you need to have in different phases, and where should you put that organizationally. These kind of basic questions you need to get right to put the right structures in place to scale intelligent automation.
Cool. I'm gonna throw a very tricky question, and I think it is something that there's a lot of confusion when it comes to intelligent automation initiatives. So people always say that you should align that with your corporate strategy, or some other people say align that with your company vision. What's the right, how do you align your strategy? Is it aligning that to the company's vision, or is it the corporate strategy?
No, I guess that can be different, but a vision of a company might be a little bit fluffy sometimes, and maybe sometimes feel a bit disconnected from the actual priorities. So maybe what is easier, and what I've tried a lot when I was doing this then at Ericsson, is to really align it with the strategy, or at least the strategic priorities and the strategic programs that were running at different timings. Just to say, when we started in 2016, a lead time reduction and cash flow optimization was very high on the agenda. So obviously we tried to frame the whole thing of RPA back then as something that can reduce lead time a lot in supply chain, for instance, where that was important. And then later cost reduction became very, big important topic, and the strategic program, cost reduction program across the enterprise. Then it was fairly easy to position intelligent automation as something that can reduce cost across all the levers of all parts of the organization. While later, again, like customer experience became more of a strategic priority, and that was also quite easy to align the topic of intelligent automation and how that can really increase the customer experience. So whatever your strategic priority is in the company, I think that is where the budgets tend to be. That is where the executive focus tend to be. That is where you get the kind of governance structures and execution structures needed to really execute and do something transformative. So if you can hook into these narratives and play in those narratives, so to say, I think you can get a quite good pace in your program, unless we're just having this as a separate IT project.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting perspective, just in terms of how you place your strategy. And still on that strategy conversation, how do you define, let's say, for RPA, or maybe better still, let's talk about intelligent automation. How do you define an effective strategy?
I think it's a lot about learning and doing and constantly evolving. I think if you are in the beginning of this, you don't know what the end game will be like 5 years ahead of you, or even like 2 years ahead of you. But it's good to think at least 1 or 2 years ahead. And how do you do that? I think you can learn a lot from the market, but you need to, of course, filter a bit, because there's so much kind of little bit bullshit. There's so much overselling. So what is real, and what is actually doable in different time phrases. But to really, as I said, try to position it strategically, try to align with strategic initiatives, and try to get as much investments as possible being poured into this area, because then you can, of course, accelerate, and investments will lead to having a more kind of interesting strategy to put in place. Things like we started with quite early on was how can we automate 100% of all manual processes in the company? How can we provide everybody in the company with a digital worker that can do parts of their work? How can we reduce the number of manual interactions with us as a company to almost zero by handling everything digitally? So these kind of little bit hairy targets we could also put in place to really put some focus on certain areas.
Interesting. And I think this brings us to the next phase, which is talking about the 6 pillars of your defined operating model. And I think the one thing I really loved about it is the way you've defined it into 6 phases. The first and the second pillar does emphasize on the methodology, value tracking, business transformation, and value realization. But can you just summarize, this, your first pillar and the second pillar? Why, what's the importance of having all of this come together for you?
Yeah, a great question, and here I think some companies do this only as like a management topic, bring in McKinsey, for instance, and do something with the C-suite, and some companies do it as an IT project, backup, starting from the bottom up. And I think both of these tend to fail, or just at least high chance it will fail. But rather, how can you drive something that is aligned to the strategy of the company, but is really transformative in nature? And in order to do that, I think it doesn't matter. It's not about IT. It's not about tools. It's not even about processes. In the end, it's about what business value you can bring with this, and what kind of transformative change you can drive. And in order to do that, you need to be able to measure this, because in the end, if someone decides to invest $1 million or $10 million or $100 million into intelligent automation, someone will expect a return on that investment, right? So you need to be able to figure out then what is the cost of doing this, and what is the value that has been created, be it in cost reductions, be it in customer experience, be it in lead time reductions, or be it in whatever key business metric that you try to affect. And this is really about setting up a methodology as to how we can capture these baselines, translate that into some kind of a monetary value, and follow up upon that throughout the whole initiative. And the business transformation piece is very much about how do you align the promise of intelligent automation and the opportunities of intelligent automation with actual business pain points of the executives and the VPs and the director levels kind of people in the different businesses that you hope to serve with intelligent automation. And how do you really understand their pain points? Because they will not talk in the language of intelligent automation. They will talk in the language of their business, right? And the operations that they are driving. So how do you position this in their context and get their blessing and championship and support and investments, hopefully, to drive this at scale within their different businesses? So I think that is what business transformation is about. Bring this change competence, but also bring the technical competence to transform a function or a business unit, and help these leaders and lead that transformation.
I think I love that, when you talk about business transformation, you've just actually summarized a lot of things. And these are things that companies take for granted when they think about intelligent automation or having such initiative. And I think this might be another topic for another day, but definitely need to have a conversation how we talk about ROI and drill it down into ROI and what it really means. But I want to piggyback on some of the 6 pillars again. And I know we've talked about the first and the second. I want to talk about the third pillar. And this is a topic that I know it's very close to it's close to your heart, especially when you talk about opportunity identification, pipeline generation, and how companies can actually generate this. And I know a few weeks ago we had a conversation about democratizing IA, for example, IA ideas within an organization, and I think rather than have that conversation in the private, I want to still share your thoughts around this. So coming back to your third pillar about pipeline generation, how should an organization, for example, a large organization, democratize IA ideas? How do they get, sustainable pipeline generation?
Yeah, right. And I think this is one area where a lot of companies fail, and especially the ones that tend to take this as an IT project, because driving intelligent automation at scale over a multi-year requires a constant, generation of pipeline. So it's not about doing this once, bringing in consultancy helping you. This is about setting a model where you constantly have new pipeline. And if you are in a huge organization or even a mid-sized organization, there will be a lot of opportunities, but those are generally unlocked. And there are too few people understands how to find these in relation to how many people actually sit and experience problems. So I think it's a multiple things you need to do in order to do that. One is competence, that's kind of transformative competence to talk to the businesses to even open up, right? So how are you getting yourself allowed to go down to the shared service center in Eastern Europe or India, for instance, and map through all these processes? That is obviously one good way to generate a pipeline. But not only once, but keep doing that, right? Because you will, in the beginning, you might automate 20%, then you're at 40%, and after 5 years, you're at 80% when you deploy more and more sophisticated technologies. So keep the investment going and keep the competence high. And maybe in the beginning, you might need to invest maybe 50% of the whole budget in generating pipeline and keep that push coming. And then you need to, in parallel, I think it's good if you build mechanisms so you can get this pipeline for free, so to say. So you get the leads coming into the center of excellence if you run such an organization. And then one way could be to democratize idea generation. So you set processes and you work with nudging and games and so on to get everybody to submit what their problems are and have something that easily qualifies these problems into opportunities. Or you go one step further. You train your people to become citizen developers But that is much harder than training people to just open up for and submit problems and ideas. That requires really putting efforts, hours, and training a lot of people. But there are multiple ways to do this. But you shouldn't stop the investing in the pipeline generation and a little bit top-down push on creating it while enabling the people on the ground to come up with their ideas.
I think you've just talked about a bunch of things, and this brings me back to some of the thoughts I had earlier on. I think earlier on last week, I started thinking about me as a consultant, how I was able to generate ideas within an enterprise. And I really want to pick your brain on three things that really worked in a large organization I used to work for. So the first one was we got into a point where people can actually come into the center of excellence with ideas. So we went from going out like road shows, show and tells, to people actually coming with ideas to talk about intelligent automation ideas. That was one thing, and I think the second one we did was that we used to have a lot of hackathons, which we did internally. So we used to have different branches would go out to different branches and would do a 2 or 3 days hackathon, and we come up with some of the ideas. But some of the ideas never really made it past the hackathon. Maybe out of, let's say, whatever hackathon we did, maybe it was just one good idea and all of that. But how can companies use some of this strategy? Is this just for large organizations? Would this only work for large organizations, or would this work for, let's say, SME and mid-market?
No, I don't see why it wouldn't work for SME and mid-market. I think in those organizations there are not so long communication lines, so maybe you need a little bit less structure. Sometimes it could be enough with just word of mouth, right? And you can be much faster. But if you are a large organization, that doesn't work. If you sit with 7 layers of managers in various organizations, so I think you need to adopt a little bit depending on where you try to do this. But what you mentioned, hackathons and ideation conferences and workshops, and we have webcasts and having competitions and so on. I think that drives motivation, and when people win this, and you really see that there's a lot more other people get motivated to join this journey. So I think it's all great ideas.
I love that. Thanks for your take on that. And I think let's come back into our 6 pillars. The fourth pillar that talks about delivery. I know you're a very strong advocate. You've spoken about, let's say, DevOps, where there's no the lines between delivery and operations is blurry. You've talked about different organization structure. Can you just talk more around that? How can companies structure their delivery, their delivery teams, for example? How can they structure? How would this be sustainable for them?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And here as well, there are so many kind of management aspects you can play with in setting a good model. One is obviously the operational piece. How do you really create a standardized structure process where you can just push cases through at as low cost as possible, which is important. In my world so far, what I've seen is that delivery cost or build cost, that is approximately 50% of a whole end-to-end cost item for an intelligent automation program. So it's really important to work constantly to take the cost and the lead time down of the project. But then there are different models you can play with. One is the centralization versus the federation versus the decentralization aspects, and I think there are pros and cons depending on what you want to achieve. I think you can get a great excitement locally if you're allowed to build your own little team, right? And you can run your own small bots, and you can maybe centralize operations of these. But But that might work until in a while. You might have 10 teams with 5 people in each that are doing RPA bots in different places. In worst of cases, they're doing it on different platforms. Well, in that case, then you will never scale and really go into the hyper automation, intelligent automation. In order to do that, I think that you need to have sufficient volume of people and competence and use cases to work with. Because when doing 10 RPA projects, that's not enough to be efficient in doing RPA. The same with doing 10 AI/ML projects, that's not efficient. You need to do 50. After that, you can get some kind of a standardized process, so you can get the scale and the skill needed to do that. And unless you are in a huge organization, you will have to have a little bit more centralized model to attend that kind of a scale. So that's my take. If you want to do simpler cases locally fast, it could be good to go a little bit more federated. If you want to scale intelligent automation faster on an enterprise level, then I think it's smarter to go more centralized. And then you shouldn't forget 2 other aspects. One is financial model, and then the other one is resource modeling, vendor model, so to say. And those are also linked. So I think if you have only central budget and you spend it on developers, you will not scale, because you have a limited ability to execute and to scale. But if you have a model where the business pays in a decentralized way, so you can scale up and down the spend and the budget depending on demand, and you use also vendors to complement your team, so to say, so you can scale up and down on the resource side. Then you build a model where you can scale indefinitely, almost, so to say.
I know you always talk about bot operations, about simplification. And I tell you what, when you talk about the total cost of ownership for any, for intelligent automation, this takes a chunk of it. Managing your bots, putting things into production. How can enterprises simplify bot operations?
That's another good question. These are a little bit hidden costs, because they sometimes tend to end up in another budget, like an IT operations budget, which is already huge, and then you add this little bot thing, and you can't even notice it, so to say, from a CIO perspective, almost in the beginning. But after a while, this becomes a problem, especially with RPA, I think, because those are brittle by nature. They break. When you have changes and upgrades in the systems, you have to upgrade these bots too. And all of this requires people and requires time. And in the worst of cases, you have business processes that are going down. So I think what's important to work with in parallel is to automate the whole operations of automation, which seems like logic, right? Because you have that competence in the team. But then not many organizations are doing that, or they're not really prioritizing that. But I think there's really a play here to optimize automation, and to do all of this as optimized and automated as possible, be it the whole service management, ticket management, workflow, be it having the ability to predict errors in advance, be it the ability to optimize licenses and infra resources and allocate those in a dynamic way, hopefully automated way, or being the way where business stakeholders have much better visibility on their solutions, and if they're up and if they're down, and if they are actually performing according to expectations and according to the business case you made earlier when starting the project. So I think all of these aspects are important to work with in operations, and also to enable scale, because if this consumes all the budget and all the resources, well, then you will not scale either.
Interesting. Just because we're running out of time, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's a lot to think about. There's a lot to unpack from it. But before you leave, I think I always ask this question to everyone that's come on IA Simplified. What's your advice for companies trying to invest into AI and automation? in the next 12 months? What's your advice? How do they start?
There are so many things to think of, but I think don't be afraid to bring in advice from the outside, but also trust your people, right? The people who are passionate internally in the company. But make sure that you drive it from a transformation perspective and not from an IT perspective, because you risk getting stuck. That's right. And then don't be afraid to try. Try and fail fast, you might say, but in this case, in many cases, it will be try and succeed fast. But if you never try, you will not succeed. And after a while, if you try a lot, you will fail some, but mostly you will succeed.
I love it. I love the advice. Very, very useful advice for SMEs, mid-market, and large enterprises. And I think just to wrap it up, how do people reach out to you?
Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can just add me and say hi, or email me alexander.hubel@turbotic.com, and I'm happy to discuss all of these aspects there. I'm quite passionate about them.
Brilliant. Thanks for coming, Alexander. Just to wrap it up, we'll have the video transcription and the video available on YouTube and other social media platforms, as well as LinkedIn Live. The transcription is going to be available on our website, rpajargonbuster.com. Then if you need to discuss intelligent automation for SME and mid-market, financial services, healthcare, or other related fields, feel free to reach out to RPA Jargon Buster. You can reach out to us via our email as well, info@rpajargonbuster.com, or through our website as well. But until next time, stay informed.